Black waitress fired for saving an elderly biker from bullies. 4 hours later, 100 bikers showed up. The grease-stained clock above the coffee machine read 2:47 p.m. when everything changed at Mel's Highway Diner. Aaliyah Washington had been on her feet for 7 straight hours, her black sneakers squeaking against the checkered linoleum as she balanced 3 plates of meatloaf on her left arm and a fresh pot of coffee in her right hand. The lunch rush had been brutal, but that was nothing new at this franchise location off Interstate 75. "Order up!" shouted Miguel from the kitchen, his voice cutting through the din of clinking silverware and tired conversations. Aaliyah caught his eye and nodded, though every muscle in her back screamed for a break. She'd learned long ago that asking for one would only earn her a lecture from Mr. Patterson, the assistant manager, about work ethic and commitment to excellence. The diner buzzed with its usual mix of truckers, traveling families, and local workers grabbing late lunches. Chrome and red vinyl booths lined the windows, each filled with customers who barely looked up when she refilled their coffee cups. Aaliyah had perfected the art of being invisible: smile, serve, collect tips, repeat. It was safer that way. She was wiping down table 6 when the rumble outside made her pause. Through the large front windows, she watched a lone motorcycle pull into the parking lot. The rider was older, maybe in his 70s, with a gray beard that reached his chest and weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work. He wore a black leather vest over a faded denim shirt, and despite his age, he moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd earned his place in the world. Harold Martinez had been riding for 53 years, and he could read a room faster than most people could order coffee. As he pushed through the diner's glass door, the small bell overhead announcing his arrival, he noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they grew quieter. Eyes followed him as he made his way to an empty booth in the corner, his worn boots silent against the floor. Aaliyah approached with her usual professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Coffee black," Harold replied, his voice gravelly but kind. "And maybe a slice of that apple pie I saw in the case up front." "Coming right up." She started to turn away, then paused. "You traveling far today?" Something in her genuine tone made Harold look up from the menu. Most people either feared him or ignored him. This young woman seemed to actually see him. "Just passing through. Heard this place had good pie. Best in 3 counties," Aaliyah said with a real smile this time. "I'll get that for you." As she walked away, Harold noticed how she moved, efficient but tired, carrying herself with a quiet strength that reminded him of his late wife, Rosa. He also noticed how the management staff watched her, their expressions ranging from indifferent to openly hostile. He'd seen that look before, in boardrooms and union halls, whenever someone in power wanted to remind someone else of their place. The trouble started 10 minutes later. A group of 5 young men burst through the front door like they owned the place, which, in a way, they did. Marcus Peterson Jr. led the pack, his designer jeans and perfectly styled hair marking him as someone who never worked a real day in his life. His father owned a significant stake in the franchise corporation that ran this diner and 37 others across 3 states. Behind him came his usual crew, trust fund kids who treated minimum wage workers like personal entertainment. "Yo, where's our usual table?" Marcus called out, his voice carrying the entitled edge of someone who'd never been told no. He spotted Harold in the corner booth and nudged his friend Tyler. "Look at this old relic. What's next, gonna let homeless people eat here?" The comments grew louder as they settled into the booth directly across from Harold. Aaliyah, returning with his coffee and pie, felt her stomach clench as she recognized the group. They came in every few weeks, always causing trouble, always leaving messes that she had to clean up while they walked away laughing. "Here you go, sir," she said to Harold, setting down his order with steady hands despite the growing tension. "Thank you, miss." Harold looked at her name tag. "Aaliyah. Beautiful name." "Thank you," she replied, but her attention was divided. From the corner of her eye, she could see Marcus standing up, his voice getting louder. "Hey, Gramps!" Marcus called out, his friends snickering behind him. This ain't the VFW hall. Maybe you should take your midlife crisis somewhere else. Harold continued eating his pie, not acknowledging the taunts. He'd faced worse from better men, and these boys didn't even register as a threat. But their persistence was beginning to disturb other customers, and he could see the waitress, Aaliyah, growing more uncomfortable by the minute. "I'm talking to you, old man!" Marcus stepped closer, emboldened by his friend's laughter. "You deaf or just stupid?" That's when Tyler decided to escalate things. He walked over to Harold's table and accidentally bumped into it, sending coffee splashing across the surface and onto Harold's vest. "Oops," Tyler said with mock innocence. "Guess you should watch where you're sitting." The diner had gone completely quiet now. Other customers watched nervously as Marcus and his crew formed a loose circle around Harold's booth. The elderly biker simply reached for napkins, his movements calm and deliberate. "No harm done," Harold said evenly, dabbing at the coffee stain. "Actually, I think there is harm done," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more dangerous tone. "See, my dad's an investor in this place, and we don't like the kind of clientele it's been attracting lately. Maybe it's time for you to move along." Aaliyah had seen enough. She'd watched these spoiled brats terrorize customers before, seen management turn a blind eye because of their family connections. She'd bitten her tongue through racial slurs disguised as jokes, through wandering hands and degrading comments. But watching them corner this dignified old man who'd done nothing but order pie and coffee, that was her breaking point. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward with her coffee pot held like a weapon. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus turned to her with a sneer. "Yeah, there's a problem. We're trying to have a conversation with Grandpa here, and he's being rude." "From where I'm standing, you're the ones being rude," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady but loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "This gentleman is a paying customer trying to enjoy his meal in peace." "Oh, so now the help is telling us how to behave?" Tyler laughed. "That's rich." "The help?" Aaliyah repeated, her jaw tightening. "Is that what you think I am?" Harold watched this young woman stand up for him, recognizing the courage it took. In his vest pocket, a small digital recorder was capturing every word. He'd been documenting these kinds of incidents for months, but he'd never seen an employee willing to risk their job for a stranger. "Look, waitress," Marcus said, stepping closer to Aaliyah. "Why don't you mind your own business and go get us some coffee? The grown-ups are talking." "I said no," Aaliyah replied firmly. "You need to leave this man alone and sit down, or you need to leave the diner." The silence that followed was deafening. Other customers watched in shock, some with admiration, others with horror at what they knew was coming. From behind the counter, Mr. Patterson was already reaching for the phone, his face red with fury. Marcus laughed, but there was something ugly in it now. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Do you know what my family could do to this place?" "I know exactly who you are," Aaliyah said, standing her ground even though her heart was pounding. "You're Bullies. And I don't care who your daddy is, in my section, customers treat each other with respect." Tyler moved forward aggressively, and that's when Aaliyah stepped between him and Harold's table, her coffee pot raised defensively. "Back off. Now." "You threatening me?" Tyler sneered. "I'm protecting a customer," Aaliyah shot back. "Which is my job." Harold slowly stood up, his movement fluid despite his age. "Son," he said to Marcus, his voice carrying decades of authority. "The lady asked you to leave me be. I suggest you listen." "Or what, old man? You gonna fight all of us?" Harold smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the younger men suddenly nervous. "I don't fight children," he said simply. "But I do remember faces." The standoff lasted another 10 seconds before Mr. Patterson came rushing over, his face flushed with panic and rage. "Miss Washington," he barked. "Step away from those customers immediately." "Mr. Patterson, they were harassing." "I said step away. Now." Aaliyah reluctantly moved back, but she kept her eyes on Marcus and his crew. The assistant manager turned to the young men with an apologetic smile. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry about this incident. Please let me comp your meals and... Too late for that, Marcus said coldly, his eyes fixed on Aaliyah. We want her fired. Now. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Aaliyah felt the world tilt around her, but she kept her chin up. Harold watched the scene unfold, his hand unconsciously moving to the recorder in his pocket. I can't just... Patterson stammered. You can and you will, Marcus said firmly. Or my father will be very interested to hear about the kind of service his investment is providing. Patterson's shoulders sagged in defeat. He turned to Aaliyah, and she could see the apology in his eyes even as he spoke the words that would change everything. Miss Washington, you're terminated. Effective immediately. The words, "You're terminated," echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to its destination. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Aaliyah stood frozen for a moment, the weight of those two words crushing down on her shoulders. 3 years. 3 years of double shifts, of putting up with condescending customers and impossible demands. 3 years of being the reliable one, the one who never called in sick, who stayed late to help close, who covered for coworkers without complaint. All of it erased in an instant because she dared to protect an elderly man from a pack of spoiled bullies. Did you hear me, Miss Washington? Mr. Patterson's voice was shakier now, but he pressed on, knowing that Marcus Peterson Jr. was watching his every move. You're fired. Please remove your apron and leave the premises immediately. Marcus crossed his arms with satisfaction, a smug smile playing on his lips. That's more like it. Maybe now this place can maintain some standards. The humiliation was designed to be public, and it worked. Aaliyah could feel the eyes of every customer boring into her, some sympathetic, others simply curious about the spectacle. A family of 4 in booth 3 whispered among themselves. 2 truckers at the counter shook their heads in disgust, though whether it was at her or the situation, she couldn't tell. You can't be serious, Aaliyah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Patterson, you know what really happened here. You saw them harassing him. What I saw, Patterson replied, his voice growing louder for the benefit of his audience, was an employee who created a disturbance, threatened paying customers, and showed a complete lack of professional judgment. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to shift the narrative away from what had actually transpired. Harold remained seated, his weathered hands folded on the table, watching this corporate theater with the detached interest of someone who'd seen this script played out countless times before. But behind his calm exterior, something was burning. This young woman had risked everything for a stranger, and now she was being destroyed for it. Professional judgment? Aaliyah's voice found its strength again, though it cracked slightly with emotion. What about human decency? What about treating people with respect? Tyler snorted with laughter. Respect is earned, sweetheart. Maybe you should learn your place. The comment sent a ripple of uncomfortable silence through the diner. Even some of Marcus's friends shifted uncomfortably. That had crossed a line that everyone recognized. My place, Aaliyah repeated slowly, untying her apron with deliberate movements. My place is standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. My place is treating every human being with dignity, regardless of how much money they have or who their daddy is. She folded the apron neatly, the green fabric that had been her uniform for 3 years now feeling foreign in her hands. And if that's not professional enough for this establishment, then I guess I don't belong here anyway. Patterson winced at her words but pressed forward with the humiliation. You'll need to return your name tag as well. And any company property. Aaliyah unpinned the small plastic rectangle that read, Aaliyah, in faded letters and placed it on Harold's table along with her apron. The gesture was deliberate. She wasn't handing them back to management. She was leaving them with the man she'd defended. There, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Is there anything else you need to strip from me before I go? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning that made several customers look away in shame. This wasn't just about a firing anymore. It was about dignity, about power, about what happens when ordinary people try to do the right thing in a world designed to punish them for it. Harold slowly stood up, his movement drawing everyone's attention. He looked directly at Aaliyah, and when their eyes met, something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared values that transcended age, race, and circumstance. "Miss," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silent diner. "What you did here today, that took real courage. Don't let anyone tell you different." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it carefully on the table next to her name tag. "For the pie and coffee. And for showing an old man that there are still good people in this world." Aaliyah felt tears finally break free, but she managed a smile. "Thank you, sir. That means everything." Harold nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and promise. There was something in his eyes, a depth that suggested he was far more than he appeared to be. But he simply sat back down and returned to his pie as if nothing had happened. Marcus rolled his eyes. "How touching! Are we done with this little drama? I'd like to eat in peace now." Patterson cleared his throat. "Miss Washington, you need to leave now. Security will escort you out if necessary." "No need," Aaliyah said, gathering what remained of her dignity. She looked around the diner one last time, memorizing faces, storing away this moment for whatever came next. "I can see myself out." She walked toward the door with her head held high, each step echoing in the unnatural quiet. As she passed the family in booth 3, the mother caught her eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." At the counter, one of the truckers raised his coffee cup in a small salute. Just before reaching the door, Aaliyah turned back to look at Harold one more time. He was eating his pie as if nothing had happened, but when he sensed her gaze, he looked up and gave her the slightest nod. In that moment, she had the strangest feeling that this wasn't really the end, that somehow, in ways she couldn't understand, this was just the beginning. The glass door closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving her standing in the parking lot with nothing but her purse, her car keys, and the knowledge that she'd done the right thing. The autumn air was crisp against her face, mixing with the tears that finally came freely now that she was away from their judging eyes. She'd lost her job, her income, her security, but she'd kept her soul. And somehow, looking back at the diner where Harold still sat calmly eating his pie, that felt like it might be enough. The diner settled back into its artificial normalcy after Aaliyah's departure, but Harold Martinez remained perfectly still, his fork suspended halfway between the plate and his mouth. To any observer, he appeared to be simply an old man processing what had just happened. In reality, he was calculating, analyzing, and feeling a familiar surge of satisfaction that came with witnessing exactly what he'd been hoping to document for months. Marcus and his crew had returned to their booth, already spinning the story to make themselves the victims of an aggressive employee. Their laughter grated against Harold's ears, but he maintained his composure, taking another deliberate bite of apple pie while his weathered fingers slowly moved to the small device concealed in his vest pocket. The digital recorder had captured everything. After 37 minutes of waiting, long enough for the adrenaline to fade and attention to shift away from him, Harold casually reached into his leather jacket and withdrew a worn leather notebook, the kind mechanics used to track repairs. Its pages were filled with dates, times, locations, and detailed observations written in his careful handwriting. To anyone watching, he looked like a retiree jotting down travel notes. He was documenting something far more significant. October 15th, 2:47 p.m. Mel's Highway Diner, location number 247, he wrote, his pen moving steadily across the page. Employee termination witnessed. Aaliyah Washington fired for intervening in customer harassment incident. Management sided with harassers due to family financial connections to franchise ownership. Harold paused, listening to Marcus's continued commentary about knowing your place and respecting your betters. Each word was another nail in the corporate coffin he'd been building for 8 months. The notebook contained similar entries from 17 different franchise locations across 3 states. Employee denied bathroom breaks during 8-hour shifts. Manager forcing staff to work off the clock. Kitchen equipment faulty, creating safety hazards. Racial slurs tolerated from management when directed at minority employees. Harassment complaints buried to protect valuable customers. What made Harold's investigation unique wasn't just his methodical approach, it was his identity. Harold Martinez wasn't simply a concerned citizen with time on his hands. He was a retired investigative journalist who'd spent 23 years exposing corporate corruption for the Chicago Tribune. After his wife Rosa died 2 years ago, he'd thrown himself into freelance work, but this case had become personal. His granddaughter Sophia had worked at a franchise location in Illinois, enduring months of harassment and wage theft before finally quitting. When she tried to report the violations, she'd been threatened with legal action and blacklisted from other positions. The corporation's lawyers had buried her complaints under a mountain of paperwork and intimidation tactics. That's when Harold had decided to take a different approach. He'd purchased a motorcycle, adopted the persona of a wandering retiree, and begun systematically visiting franchise locations across the Midwest. The leather vest, the gray beard, the quiet demeanor, it was all carefully crafted camouflage that allowed him to observe without drawing attention. People either ignored elderly bikers or treated them as harmless curiosities. It was the perfect cover for an investigation. The notebook contained evidence of systematic labor violations, but Harold had needed something more. A smoking gun that would prove the corruption went straight to the top. He needed to witness management's response to a clear case of employee abuse, particularly when family connections to corporate ownership were involved. Aaliyah Washington had just provided that evidence. Harold carefully opened the recorder app on his phone, checking the audio quality of the confrontation. Crystal clear. Every word of Marcus's threats, every capitulation from Patterson, every moment of Aaliyah's brave stand, it was all there, time-stamped and irrefutable. But more than that, he'd captured something that would resonate far beyond legal proceedings. He'd recorded a moment of genuine moral courage being punished by a system designed to protect wealth and connections over human decency. In an age of viral videos and social media justice, this recording wouldn't just be evidence, it would be a rallying cry. Harold pulled out his phone and began typing a message to his contact at the Washington Post. "Susan, I have the story. Full documentation of systematic labor abuse, plus video evidence of retaliatory firing. This one's going to be big." As he typed, Harold's mind was already moving to the next phase. The legal case would take months to develop, but Aaliyah Washington didn't have months. She just lost her job for doing the right thing, and she deserved immediate support, not eventual vindication. That's when Harold remembered the small card in his wallet, worn and creased from years of carrying it. The phone number connected him to people who understood loyalty, who knew what it meant to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. He'd been riding with the Iron Brotherhood for 43 years. They were teachers, mechanics, veterans, small business owners, people who'd built their lives on the idea that your word was your bond and you never abandoned family. And after what he'd witnessed today, Aaliyah Washington was family. Harold finished his pie, left exact change plus a generous tip, and walked calmly toward the exit. Marcus and his friends didn't even look up as he passed. In their world, people like Harold were invisible, forgettable, powerless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Outside in the parking lot, Harold pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. The call connected on the second ring. "Tommy? It's Harold. Listen, I need you to make some calls. Remember that girl I told you about, the one who got fired for standing up to bullies? It just happened. And brother, she put everything on the line for a stranger." He paused, watching traffic flow past the diner, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. "It's time to show these corporate types what real family looks like. Can you get the word out?" The voice on the other end was gravelly but warm. "How many you need?" Harold smiled, and for the first time all day, it wasn't entirely pleasant. "All of them." Harold Martinez climbed onto his Harley-Davidson with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had all the time in the world, but inside, a familiar fire was building. The same fire that had driven him through decades of investigative journalism, through late nights spent tracking down leads and confronting powerful people who thought they were untouchable. As he settled into the worn leather seat, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through a contact list that read like a directory of blue-collar America: Tommy, Tank, Rodriguez, Marcus, Wrench, Williams, Sarah, Phoenix, Chen, Bobby, Preacher, Jackson. Each name represented not just a friend, but a brother or sister in a brotherhood that had been forged through decades of loyalty, shared struggles, and an unshakable belief that ordinary people deserved to be treated with dignity. The first call went to Tommy Rodriguez, a 58-year-old Vietnam veteran who ran a small auto repair shop on the south side of the city. Tommy had been riding with Harold for 31 years, ever since they'd met at a Veterans Affairs meeting where both men were fighting for better healthcare for their fellow servicemen. "Tommy, it's Harold." The words came out calm and measured, but Tommy could hear the steel underneath. "Hey, brother. What's going on?" Harold's voice grew quieter, more intense. "Remember that investigation I've been working on? The franchise corruption case? Yeah, the one with your granddaughter. You find something?" "I found everything. But more than that, I just watched a young black woman named Aaliyah Washington lose her job for defending an old biker from a pack of entitled bullies. She didn't know me from Adam, Tommy. Didn't know what I was doing there or why it mattered. She just saw someone being hurt and stepped in, knowing it would cost her everything." The line was quiet for a moment. Tommy understood the weight of what Harold was saying. In their world, that kind of courage was sacred. She put everything on the line for a stranger. Harold continued, his voice carrying the weight of 43 years of brotherhood. "It's time." Those two words, "it's time," carried a significance that went back decades. They were code for something the Iron Brotherhood had done only 12 times in their history: a full mobilization for justice. Not violence, never violence, but a show of solidarity so overwhelming that it couldn't be ignored. "How many?" Tommy asked, already reaching for his keys. "All of them." Within minutes, Tommy's shop became command central. He called Marcus Williams, a union organizer who'd spent 20 years fighting corporate exploitation in the manufacturing sector. Marcus was in the middle of mediating a dispute between steelworkers and management when his phone buzzed. "It's time," Tommy said without preamble. Marcus didn't need explanation. He wrapped up his meeting in 30 seconds, told his assistant to reschedule everything, and headed for his bike. On the way out, he called Sarah Chin, a former Army mechanic who now taught vocational training at the community college. "Phoenix, you near your bike?" Sarah was grading papers when the call came. "Tank called you too? Harold's got something big. Young woman got fired for doing right by one of us." Sarah's pen stopped moving. She'd faced discrimination in the military, knew what it cost to stand up when the deck was stacked against you. "Where?" "Mel's Highway Diner." 1 hour. The calls spread like ripples in a pond, each conversation brief but loaded with meaning. Bobby Jackson, a retired preacher who'd spent 40 years ministering to the forgotten corners of society, was counseling a troubled teenager when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the text. "It's time. Mel's Diner. 1 hour." And quietly told the young man they'd continue their conversation tomorrow. Across the city, engines roared to life. In suburban garages, Harleys that had been lovingly maintained for decades growled awake. In apartment parking lots, older bikes that had carried their riders through economic downturns and personal tragedies fired up with determination. In driveways where American flags flew proudly, men and women who'd built their lives on the principles of hard work and mutual respect prepared for something they'd done only 11 times before. The Iron Brotherhood wasn't just a motorcycle club. It was a network of people who'd learned that when the system failed, you became the system. When corporations crushed individuals, you became the shield. When good people were punished for being good, you became their cavalry. Miguel Santos, a truck driver who'd been blacklisted from 3 companies for trying to organize safer working conditions, received the call while loading his rig. He made 2 phone calls of his own, one to his dispatcher claiming a family emergency, another to his brother-in-law who worked construction and rode a vintage Indian motorcycle. "Emergency?" his brother-in-law asked. "Moral emergency," Miguel replied. "Meet us at Mel's." The beauty of the network was its diversity. These weren't stereotypical bikers. They were teachers and mechanics, nurses and electricians, small business owners and union leaders. What united them wasn't leather vests or matching patches, but a shared understanding that some things were worth fighting for. By 3:45 p.m., 17 different phone trees had been activated. Word was spreading to riders in 3 cities, each receiving the same basic information. A young woman had been fired for protecting one of their own. Corporate bullies thought they could crush someone for doing the right thing, and Harold Martinez, a man whose integrity was unquestioned, was calling in the Brotherhood. As Harold sat in the diner parking lot, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, he could already hear it in the distance. The deep, rumbling sound of justice rolling down the highway, carried on chrome and steel by people who understood that sometimes you had to show up to make things right. Inside the diner, Marcus Peterson Jr. was probably already bragging about putting the help in their place. He had no idea what was coming. At exactly 6:47 p.m., the rumble began. It started as a distant vibration, barely perceptible above the dinner rush chatter and clinking of silverware at Mel's Highway Diner. The first customer to notice was a traveling salesman in booth 12 who paused mid-bite of his chicken fried steak, his fork suspended in the air as he tried to identify the sound. Then the windows began to rattle. The rumble grew deeper, more insistent, until it became impossible to ignore. Conversation stopped. Heads turned toward the large front windows where the first motorcycle came into view, a massive Harley-Davidson ridden by a woman in her 50s with silver hair streaming behind her despite her helmet. Behind her came another. Then another. Then a steady stream that seemed to have no end. "What the hell?" Mr. Patterson muttered from behind the cash register, his face draining of color as he watched the parking lot fill with chrome and steel. The bikes weren't racing or revving aggressively. They moved with military precision, each rider finding their spot in an organized formation that spoke of careful planning and practiced coordination. Marcus Peterson Jr. looked up from his dessert, his spoon clattering against his plate as he watched the sea of motorcycles through the window. "This can't be happening," he whispered, though deep down he knew exactly what this was about. By 6:52 p.m., over 100 motorcycles had filled not just the diner's parking lot, but spilled out onto the shoulder of the highway and into the adjacent gas station. The riders dismounted in eerie silence, removing helmets to reveal faces that defied every stereotype: a black woman in nursing scrubs, an elderly Hispanic man with kind eyes, a young Asian woman who couldn't have been older than 25, a white-haired veteran whose posture still carried military bearing. The first to enter was Tommy Rodriguez, his massive frame filling the doorway as he surveyed the scene inside. Behind him came Sarah Chin, Marcus Williams, Bobby Jackson, and dozens of others, all moving with the calm determination of people who had come to settle a debt. The dinner crowd watched in stunned silence as the bikers filed in, their boots creating a rhythmic cadence against the checkered floor. They didn't speak, didn't threaten, didn't even raise their voices. They simply took every available seat, booth, and counter space until the diner was completely, overwhelmingly occupied. Harold Martinez was the last to enter, walking slowly to the counter where Mr. Patterson stood frozen in panic. "Evening," Harold said pleasantly, as if nothing unusual was happening. "I believe you fired a young woman named Aaliyah Washington earlier today." Patterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around the diner, the bikers sat quietly, their presence more intimidating than any shouting or threats could have been. They ordered coffee, asked for menus, and behaved like perfectly normal customers, except there were over 100 of them, and they clearly weren't leaving anytime soon. She was terminated for," Patterson stammered. "For protecting an elderly customer from harassment," Sarah Chin said from her seat at the counter, her voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "That's what happened, isn't it?" A few remaining original customers had pulled out their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The woman in booth 3 began live streaming on Facebook, whispering to her camera, "You guys, something incredible is happening at this diner. These bikers just showed up and I think they're here about that waitress who got fired earlier. Marcus Peterson Jr. stood up shakily, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing panic. This is harassment. You can't all come in here and... And what? Asked Marcus Williams calmly from booth 7. Order food? Sit quietly? Isn't this a public establishment? We haven't done anything wrong, added Bobby Jackson from his spot at the counter. Haven't raised our voices, haven't threatened anyone. We're just customers same as you. The live stream was gaining viewers rapidly. Comments poured in. What's happening? Are those bikers? Someone said a waitress got fired? The woman in booth 3 tried to explain what she'd witnessed earlier, and within minutes, #JusticeForLeah was trending on Twitter. More phones appeared as other customers realized they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. A trucker in the corner booth called his wife. Honey, you're not going to believe this, but there are like 100 bikers in this diner, and they're all just sitting here drinking coffee. Patterson reached for the phone behind the counter. I'm calling the police. Please do, Harold said mildly. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing why a young woman was fired for preventing customer harassment. Especially since I have it all recorded. He pulled out his phone and played back the audio from earlier. Marcus's voice filled the diner. We want her fired. No. Or my father will be very interested to hear about the kind of service his investment is providing. The color drained completely from Patterson's face. Around the diner, bikers nodded grimly. This wasn't about intimidation, it was about justice. It was about showing a corporation that when they crushed ordinary people for doing the right thing, those people had family. And sometimes, family showed up. A teenager at table 6 had been recording everything and posting to TikTok. His videos showed the incredible scene, dozens of bikers sitting peacefully in a small-town diner, drinking coffee and demanding answers about a fired waitress. The caption read, "This is what solidarity looks like." Within an hour, the video had over 50,000 views. News outlets were picking up the story. The phone at the diner began ringing nonstop as reporters tried to get statements. And through it all, the bikers simply sat, waited, and made it clear that they weren't going anywhere until justice was served. They had turned a corporate firing into a national conversation about workers' rights, about courage, and about what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough. The revolution would be live-streamed, and it would start with apple pie and coffee in a highway diner where a young woman named Aaliyah Washington had dared to do the right thing. The standoff lasted 47 minutes before the corporate cavalry arrived. 3 black sedans pulled into the chaos of the parking lot at 7:34 p.m., their occupants emerging in expensive suits and grim expressions. Regional Director Janet Morrison led the group, her phone pressed to her ear as she surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who specialized in corporate damage control. Yes, sir, I understand the gravity of the situation, she was saying into her phone. The hashtag is trending nationwide, and we have news crews en route from 3 different stations. Inside the diner, the bikers maintained their peaceful occupation, though the arrival of corporate executives had created a subtle shift in energy. Harold Martinez slowly stood from his position at the counter, and every eye in the place turned to him. Friends, Harold said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing large groups. I think it's time you all knew exactly who I am and why we're here. He reached into his vest and withdrew a press badge, faded but still official. Harold Martinez, investigative journalist, Chicago Tribune. The silence deepened as he continued. For the past 8 months, I've been documenting systematic labor violations across this franchise network. Wage theft, unsafe working conditions, harassment, racial discrimination, all of it covered up by management and ignored by corporate oversight. Morrison had entered the diner during Harold's revelation, her face growing paler with each word. I have documented evidence from 18 different locations, Harold continued, pulling out his weather notebook. Audio recordings, photographs, financial records showing off-the-books labor practices. But what I needed was proof that the corruption went all the way to ownership level, proof that family connections could override basic human decency. He gestured toward Marcus Peterson Jr., who had shrunk into his booth as if trying to disappear. "This afternoon, I got that proof. Young Marcus here made it very clear that his family's investment in this franchise gave him the power to destroy employees who dared to protect customers from harassment." Sarah Chin stood up from her spot at the counter. "But here's what these corporate types don't understand," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the diner. "When you attack one of us for doing right, you attack all of us." Morrison stepped forward, her damage control instincts kicking in. "Mr. Martinez, I'm sure we can reach some sort of understanding." "Understanding?" Bobby Jackson's deep voice cut through her words. "Like the understanding that let this young woman get fired for protecting an elderly customer?" The doors chimed again, and this time it was Aaliyah Washington who entered, drawn by the news reports and social media posts that had made her name known across the country. She stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight of over 100 bikers who had shown up for her, a stranger just hours before. Harold turned to her with a gentle smile. "Miss Washington, I believe I owe you an explanation." As he told her about his investigation, about his granddaughter's experience, about the months of documentation, Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of vindication, of knowing that her courage had served a purpose larger than she could have imagined. "You did more than protect an old man today," Harold said. "You became the final piece of evidence that will bring justice to hundreds of workers who've been abused by this system." Morrison's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from corporate headquarters, from legal departments, from crisis management teams. The viral videos had reached over 2 million views. Hashtag Justice for Aaliyah was trending alongside hashtag Workers' Rights and hashtag Corporate Accountability. Stock prices for the franchise corporation were beginning to slide. "Ms. Washington," Morrison said desperately, "the corporation would like to offer you your job back, with full back pay and a promotion to management." "With respect," Tommy Rodriguez interrupted. "She doesn't need your job anymore." He pulled out his phone and showed Aaliyah a screen full of job offers that had been pouring in since her story went viral. Restaurant chains wanting to hire her as a customer service trainer. Advocacy groups offering positions. A prominent civil rights organization extending an invitation to speak at their national conference. "Courage like yours," said Marcus Williams. "That's not something you put on a shelf. That's something you build a career on." Harold nodded in agreement. "I've already spoken with my editor at the Washington Post. They're offering you a position as a workplace advocacy correspondent, traveling the country to document stories like yours." But beyond the job offers and media attention, something deeper had been forged in that diner. As the bikers began to file out, each one stopped to shake Aaliyah's hand, to exchange contact information, to make it clear that she now had family in every state between the Atlantic and the Pacific. "You stood up for one of us," Sarah Chin said simply. "That makes you one of us. For life." The corporate executives eventually retreated to their cars and conference calls, leaving behind promises of investigations and policy changes that everyone knew were damage control. But the real victory wasn't corporate, it was personal. 6 months later, Aaliyah Washington would stand before a congressional subcommittee on labor practices, her testimony helping to pass the strongest worker protection legislation in decades. Harold's investigation would result in $47 million in fines and the complete restructuring of the franchise corporation's labor practices. But that night, as the last motorcycle pulled out of the parking lot, Aaliyah stood in the diner's entrance with Harold, watching their newfound family disappear into the darkness. "They came for me," she said wonderingly. "People I'd never met came for me." Harold smiled, remembering his late wife Rose's words about the power of doing right. "That's what family does," he said simply. "And you'll never stand alone again." The revolution had begun with one woman's courage and ended with the promise that such courage would never go unanswered. In a world that often punished people for doing right, the Iron Brotherhood had proven that sometimes, justice rode on two wheels and arrived exactly when it was needed most.